Some say Christmas is about giving, others say it's about receiving. But for me, it became about finding what was lost. For 50 years, my mother kept a locket with a name inside, the name of a father I never knew. A young soldier who supposedly died in the humid jungles of Vietnam before I was born. His body was never recovered, just a telegram and condolences from a government that had sent thousands of boys to fight a war. Few understood. My mother moved on as survivors must, but kept his memory alive in small ways. A flag in a display case, a faded photograph on the mantel, and stories of a love cut tragically short. I grew up with the ghost of a hero, a man frozen in time. But ghosts aren't supposed to appear in the flesh, huddled on a bench outside a homeless shelter on Christmas Eve, clutching dog tags that should have been buried half a century ago. The snow had been falling for hours by the time I arrived at the downtown Hope shelter on Christmas Eve. Boston winters show no mercy, especially to those without walls to keep out the cold. I hadn't planned to volunteer that night. I was supposed to be on a flight to my mother's house in Ohio, but a blizzard had other plans, grounding all departures and leaving me stranded in the city. Better to be useful than sorry for yourself, my mother had said when I called to break the news. At 68, she still approached disappointment with practical wisdom. Find somewhere to help out. There's always someone having a worse Christmas than you. She was right, as usual. The shelter was overwhelmed with people seeking refuge from the brutal cold, families with wide-eyed children, elderly couples clinging to each other's warmth, and solitary figures who avoided eye contact, clutching their few possessions as if the world might take those too. I checked in with the coordinator, a harried woman named Diane, who handed me an apron and pointed me toward the kitchen. We're serving dinner at 7. Until then, just circulate, hand out blankets, be present. Being present. It was something my mother always emphasized in her quiet way. Your father never got to be present for a single Christmas with you, she would say. So we owe it to him to be fully here for each other. As I moved through the crowded room, I had no idea that being present would take on an entirely new meaning before the night was through. That the ghost I'd lived with all my life was about to materialize from the swirling snow outside. The shelter hummed with a mixture of Christmas carols playing softly from an old radio and the murmur of conversations in various languages. Volunteers scurried about, distributing hot chocolate and setting up cots in the gymnasium for the overnight stay. Despite the crowd, there was a gentleness to the chaos, a shared understanding that on this night of all nights, kindness mattered most. I had just finished helping a young mother settle her children when I noticed him through the frosted window. An elderly man sat alone on a bench outside, seemingly oblivious to the snowflakes gathering on his threadbare coat and the knit cap pulled low over his ears. While everyone else had been hurrying inside for hours, he remained motionless, facing the street as if waiting for someone who would never arrive. "Has that man been offered shelter?" I asked Diane as she rushed past with a stack of towels. She paused, following my gaze. "He's been there since I arrived at 4. Marty tried twice to bring him in, but he just shook his head. Some folks." She sighed, the weight of experience in her voice. "Some folks are carrying things heavier than the cold." I watched him for several minutes. There was something in his stillness that drew me. Not the restless fidgeting of someone fighting the cold, but the profound stillness of someone who had surrendered to it, someone who perhaps didn't believe he deserved warmth. "I'm going to try again," I said, grabbing an extra blanket and my own scarf. The blast of cold air as I pushed open the door made me gasp. The temperature had dropped further, and the wind carried ice crystals that stung my cheeks. How was he surviving out here? As I approached, I could see his hands, red and chapped, clasped around something small and metallic. His fingers moved mechanically, thumbs rubbing over the object as if it were a worry stone or rosary. His face, partially hidden by the cap and an unkempt gray beard, was weathered beyond his years, lined with deep creases that spoke of hardship rather than just age. "Sir," I said softly, not wanting to startle him, "it's freezing out here. Please come inside." He didn't look up, but his thumbs stopped their movement. The object in his hands caught the light from the street lamp. A dog tag, its surface worn but still reflective. For a moment we remained in tableau. The falling snow, the silent man, my outstretched hand offering a blanket he hadn't acknowledged. "I'm all right here, miss," he finally said, his voice a low rasp as if seldom used. "Thank you kindly." "You'll freeze before morning," I persisted, draping my scarf around his shoulders despite his protest. "There's hot food inside, a place to sleep, no questions asked." He looked up then, and something in his gaze made my breath catch. His eyes were a striking blue, clear and intelligent despite the exhaustion evident in the dark circles beneath them. They were oddly familiar, though I couldn't place why. "What's your name?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could consider its intrusiveness. His fingers tightened around the dog tag. "These days, most folks just call me Mac." "Well, Mac, I'm Emily, and I'd consider it a personal favor if you'd come in, just for tonight. It's Christmas Eve, no one should be alone in the cold." A bitter sound touched his lips. Been alone in worse places than this, on worse nights than Christmas. But he slowly stood, his movements stiff with cold and age. As he rose, the dog tag shifted in his hand, and I caught a glimpse of engraved letters before he tucked it quickly into his pocket. What I saw made my heart stutter. It couldn't be. The light, the snow, the distance, I must have misread it. But as I led him toward the shelter door, a name echoed in my mind, a name I'd known all my life without ever having heard it spoken by its owner. Harrison Robert J. The same name engraved inside my mother's locket. Inside, the warmth of the shelter enveloped us like a physical embrace. Mac paused in the doorway, blinking as his eyes adjusted to the light. I noticed how he scanned the room, a quick practiced assessment of exits and occupants, before allowing me to guide him to an empty table in the corner. "Wait here," I said. "I'll get you something hot to eat." He nodded, removing neither his coat nor his cap despite the heat. As I moved toward the kitchen, I glanced back to find him watching me with that same intense gaze that had struck me outside. There was something unsettlingly familiar about him, something I couldn't quite place. In the kitchen, my hands trembled as I ladled thick stew into a bowl. I must have been mistaken about the name on the dog tag. Robert J. Harrison was a common enough name. There must have been hundreds of soldiers with similar names in Vietnam. The coincidence was striking but ultimately meaningless. Yet as I returned with the food and coffee, doubt gnawed at me. My mother had shown me the telegram only once, the official notification of Robert Harrison's death, presumed killed in action near the Cambodian border in 1971. His body was never recovered, one of the thousands listed as missing in action. For years, my mother had held on to hope, checking with the Department of Defense for updates until finally accepting that the man she loved was never coming home. Mac ate slowly, methodically, the movements of someone accustomed to making food last. I sat across from him, trying not to stare but finding it impossible to look away. "You got family, Emily?" he asked suddenly, surprising me with the use of my name. "Yes," I replied. My mother lives in Ohio. I was supposed to fly out today for Christmas, but the storm changed those plans." He nodded, eyes on his bowl. "She must be worried about you. She understands." Mom's pretty self-sufficient. It's been just the two of us most of my life." At this, his spoon paused halfway to his mouth. "Your father? Never knew him. He died in Vietnam before I was born." Mac set down his spoon entirely, his weathered hands flat against the table as if steadying himself. "I'm sorry to hear that. War takes more than just the men who die in it." There was something in his voice, a depth of understanding that went beyond sympathy, that made me bold enough to ask, "Were you there? In Vietnam?" His gaze shifted away. "Another lifetime ago." We sat in silence for several moments, the cheerful chorus of Silent Night from the radio creating an odd counterpoint to the tension between us. Finally, I gathered my courage. "Mac," I said quietly, "I saw something outside." "On your dog tag." His hand moved instinctively to his pocket, protective. "Just an old piece of metal. May I see it? Please?" He hesitated, then slowly withdrew the dog tag, holding it in his closed fist for a moment before extending his hand. The tag rested on his palm, the stamped letters worn but still legible. Harrison Robert J. below were his service number, blood type, and religion. Catholic. My throat tightened. "This name," I managed. "It's not who I am anymore," he interrupted, closing his fingers around the tag again. "That man died a long time ago." "But you didn't die," I whispered, the realization sweeping through me like a physical wave. "You're alive." "You're Robert Harrison." His eyes met mine, and in them I saw fear, shame, and something like relief. I used to be," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "But that man, who he was, what he did, what he couldn't face, he's gone." "What couldn't you face?" I asked, my heart pounding. His gaze dropped to the table. "Coming home, being the man they expected, after what happened over there." He shook his head. "Some ghosts follow you forever, even for 50 years, especially for 50 years. Mac, Robert, agreed to move to a quieter corner of the shelter, away from the curious glances of other volunteers. We sat in plastic chairs near a small Christmas tree decorated with handmade ornaments, its lights casting multicolored shadows across his weary face. "I have so many questions," I began, then stopped, overwhelmed by the enormity of what was happening. How do you start a conversation with a ghost made flesh? "You look like her," he said softly, unexpectedly. "Your mother, Catherine. Something about your eyes." The sound of my mother's name in his voice sent a shiver through me. This was real. This man, this homeless veteran I'd found by chance or fate, had once loved my mother, had been part of creating me. "What happened?" I finally asked. "Everyone thought you died. There was a telegram, a memorial service. Mom waited for years, hoping." He winced, pain etching deeper lines around his eyes. "It's not a story I'm proud of. Not one with heroes. I'd still like to hear it." He took a deep breath, turning the dog tag over and over between his fingers. "My unit was on patrol near the Cambodian border. We were ambushed. Heavy fire. I took shrapnel in my leg, my side." His hand moved unconsciously to his ribs. "I remember the chopper coming in, the medevac. Then nothing until I woke up in a field hospital 2 days later." He paused, lost in memory. "They told me most of my unit didn't make it. Guys I'd lived with for months gone. And there I was, alive, when better men weren't. They shipped me to a hospital in Japan to recover." "But the military notified Mom that you were killed," I said, confused. He nodded. "In the chaos, dog tags get mixed up. Bodies aren't always identifiable. Someone wearing my tag, or part of it, must have been recovered. The military made a mistake." "And you never corrected it?" Never contacted her? His eyes closed briefly. I planned to. I was going to surprise her, come home a hero. But in that hospital in Japan, things, changed. The pain medications, they helped with the physical wounds, but not the others. Not what I'd seen, what I'd done. He described slipping into addiction, how the military discharged him with little support, how he found himself adrift in a country that had already moved on from a war that still raged inside him. I tried to get clean, to be worthy of coming home to Catherine. But each time I failed, the shame grew deeper. Months became years. Eventually, I convinced myself she was better off believing I died a hero than knowing I'd become this. He gestured at himself, the shabby clothes, the decades of hard living evident in every line of his face. Did you ever look for her? For us? He nodded slowly. Once, about 15 years ago. I'd been sober for a while, working odd jobs in Cleveland. I found out she'd moved there, that she had a daughter. You. I watched your house from across the street, saw you come home from college for Christmas. You both looked so happy, so whole. I couldn't bring myself to shatter that, to force her to explain to everyone why her dead hero husband was actually a broken addict who'd abandoned her. My throat tightened with emotion, anger, pity, grief for what might have been. That wasn't your decision to make. She deserved to know. I deserved to know. You're right, he acknowledged, his voice heavy with regret. It was cowardice, not kindness, that kept me away. The longer it went on, the more impossible it seemed to bridge that gap. And now? I asked. Why are you in Boston? Why keep his dog tags if you're trying to forget who you were? He looked down at the worn metal in his palm. Some things you can't outrun no matter how far you go. As for Boston, a ghost of a smile touched his lips. Catherine always talked about seeing the snow fall over Boston Common at Christmas. Said it was on her wish list. Funny thing to remember after all these years, the coincidence, or perhaps not coincidence at all, left me speechless. My mother had indeed always loved Boston at Christmas, had visited every few years during the holidays. Had they been in the same city, perhaps passed each other on the street, never knowing how close they were? You didn't lose them, I said softly, echoing words I didn't fully understand until this moment. You just forgot the way back. We talked for hours as Christmas Eve deepened around us. The shelter gradually quieted, children nodding off on cots while adults spoke in hushed tones. Robert, I had stopped thinking of him as Mac, shared fragments of his life, the odd jobs across a dozen states, the struggle with addiction followed by years of sobriety, the homelessness that came and went, like seasons. These last few years have been the hardest, he admitted. Getting older, no safety net, winter especially. Why didn't you seek help from the VA? There are programs, he gave a bitter laugh. Pride, maybe, or shame, or just the habit of invisibility. After a while, you start to believe you don't deserve better. As he spoke, I was formulating a plan that seemed both impossible and absolutely necessary. My flight to Ohio had been rescheduled for the following afternoon, Christmas Day. The logical part of me recognized the insanity of what I was considering. Bringing a homeless man I'd just met, even if he was my biological father, home to surprise my mother after 50 years of believing him dead. Yet something deeper than logic was driving me. Perhaps it was the lifetime of watching my mother place an extra stocking on the mantel each Christmas, just in case miracles happen, or the way she still wore her wedding ring on a chain around her neck, or simply the recognition that some wounds can only heal when exposed to the light. Robert, I said, interrupting his story about a job he'd had at a fishing dock in Florida. Would you come with me tomorrow? To Ohio? He stared at me, confusion giving way to understanding, then fear. To see Catherine? Number. No, I can't. It's too late. Too much time. It's not too late, I insisted. Mom never remarried, never even dated seriously as far as I know. She kept your memory alive all these years. That's exactly why I can't go, he said, anguish clear in his voice. She mourned a hero, not this. He gestured at himself again. You survived a war that killed thousands. You battled addiction and won. You've lived on the streets but maintained your dignity, your humanity. Those sound like the actions of a hero to me, just not the kind they write about in history books. He shook his head, unconvinced. What would I even say to her? Sorry I let you think I was dead for half a century. You start with hello, I said simply. The rest will come. We fell silent, the decision hanging between us like a physical presence. Around us, the shelter had transformed for the night. Lights dimmed, volunteers taking shifts to watch over the sleeping guests. The small Christmas tree twinkling in the corner. There's something I haven't told you, Robert finally said, his voice so low I had to lean forward to hear him. Before I shipped out, Catherine told me she thought she might be pregnant. We weren't sure yet. I promised her that if it was true, I'd come home safe no matter what. That I'd be there for both of you. His eyes, when they met mine, were filled with tears. It's the only promise that ever really mattered, and I broke it. How do you forgive something like that? The question hung in the air between us, unanswerable in its enormity. But as I looked at this broken man, this father I'd never known whose blood ran in my veins, I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness exactly, not yet, but its possibility. The recognition that healing might begin with a simple choice, to open a door long thought closed. I don't know if forgiveness is something you can plan for, I said finally. Maybe it's something that happens along the way while you're busy trying to make things right. I reached across the space between us and took his hand, weathered, calloused, marked by decades of hardship. Come home with me tomorrow. Just see her. Whatever happens next, at least you'll both know the truth. No more ghosts, no more wondering. For several heartbeats he remained still, then almost imperceptibly he nodded. Okay, he whispered, his voice cracking. Okay. The flight to Columbus the next day was Robert's first time on a plane since returning from Vietnam. Before boarding, I'd taken him to a department store that had opened for limited Christmas hours, buying him new clothes, a proper winter coat, and a small gift for my mother that he selected with trembling hands, a silver ornament in the shape of a snowflake. She always loved snow, he said softly as the cashier wrapped it. Said it made the world quiet enough to hear your own thoughts. The transformation was remarkable. Cleaned up, freshly shaved except for a neatly trimmed mustache, dressed in clothes that fit, Robert Harrison emerged from beneath the layers of Mac's hardship. I could see now the handsome soldier from my mother's photographs, older certainly, marked by life, but unmistakably the same man. On the drive from Columbus to my mother's small house in Marysville, he grew increasingly anxious, his hands gripping the sides of the rental car seat. Maybe this is a mistake, he said as we turned onto her street. Maybe it's cruel to reappear like this, to force her to relive it all. Mom's stronger than you think, I assured him, though my own heart was racing. And she deserves the choice, the truth. Her house was exactly as I'd expected. Christmas lights outlining the porch, a wreath on the door, smoke curling from the chimney. I had called earlier explaining only that my flight had been delayed, but I was finally on my way, bringing someone special I wanted her to meet. A boyfriend? She had asked, hope evident in her voice. I had been single for years, focused on my career in Boston. Not exactly, I'd replied. Does Just be prepared for a surprise. Now, as we parked in the driveway, that surprise seemed woefully inadequate preparation for what was about to happen. "Wait here," I told Robert, squeezing his hand. "Let me go in first." My mother opened the door before I could knock, enveloping me in a warm hug that smelled of cinnamon and pine. At 68, Catherine Harrison remained beautiful, her dark hair now silver, but her eyes as bright and perceptive as ever. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart," she said. "I was worried about you in that storm." "I'm fine," I assured her. "Better than fine, actually." I took a deep breath. "Mom, I need you to sit down for a minute. There's someone—" But her attention had already shifted to the car in the driveway, to the figure now emerging from the passenger side. Even at this distance, even after 50 years, some recognition flickered in her expression. "Emily," she whispered, her hand clutching the doorframe. "Who is that man?" I couldn't find words adequate for the moment. Instead, I simply stepped aside as Robert approached the porch, the small wrapped package clutched in his hand, his face a mask of emotion. Fear, hope, shame, longing. For an eternal moment, they stared at each other across decades of separation. Then my mother's hand moved to her throat, to the chain that held her wedding ring. "Bobby?" she breathed, the nickname holding a lifetime of memory. He nodded, unable to speak. She stepped forward, one hand outstretched as if to verify he wasn't an apparition. Her fingers touched his cheek, and something broke in both of them simultaneously. "They told me you were dead," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I waited for you. I looked for you." "I know," he managed, his voice raw. "I was lost. So lost, I thought. I thought you were better off without me. Without what I became." She shook her head, words failing. Instead, she did something that answered every unasked question. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, holding him as tightly as if to prevent him from ever disappearing again. Over my mother's shoulder, Robert's eyes met mine. Filled with wonder, gratitude, and a tentative joy, his lips formed words I could read even without sound. "Thank you." As they clung to each other on the porch, snow began to fall, soft, slow, and silent, just as he had remembered she loved. And for the first time in 50 years, Robert Harrison was truly home. That Christmas day unfolded in ways none of us could have predicted when the sun rose. We sat together around my mother's small table, the turkey dinner she had prepared now serving as an impromptu homecoming feast. Their hands rarely separated, as if afraid that breaking contact might shatter the miracle that had brought them back together. The explanations came slowly, between tears and laughter and long moments of silent reconnection. There was pain in the telling, in the acknowledgement of decades lost, but also a profound sense of reclamation, of stories finally finding their rightful audience, of circles long broken now beginning to close. "I never took down your photographs," my mother told him. "Never stopped wearing your ring. People called it unhealthy, said I needed to move on, but I always felt you were still out there somewhere." "I was," he replied, his voice steady for the first time that day. "Just not brave enough to find my way back." As evening settled around the house, my mother retrieved the stocking she had hung for him every year. Faded now, but still bearing the name Bobby in glitter that had long since lost its shine. The sight of it brought fresh tears to his eyes, the tangible evidence of a love that had refused to die even when all logic said it should. Later, as they sat together on the couch, sharing stories I had never heard and reclaiming the history I had never known, I slipped outside to the porch. Above me, stars pierced the winter sky with impossible clarity, as if the universe itself was bearing witness to what had happened here. Some call it fate, others coincidence. But on that Christmas night, in the quiet aftermath of a 50-year separation, I knew I had witnessed something far simpler and far more profound. The miracle of finding home, no matter how long the journey.